Can you see how many people are in the?
We'll all be able to, if you look down in the participants. Participants
are
yep.
loading up.
So we will have a room full.
Yeah.
Jeffrey, you're in Kingston as well?
I am, yes.
Wonderful.
Kingston City Council.
It's great to speak with you. It's nice to be here.
Likewise.
I spent some time looking at your city because I on Google Maps today because I've never been, and wow, right on the river, looks very nice. Lots of potential, lots of beauty. So it's pretty cool to talk with all of you.
Yeah, lots of history. That's kind of, I mean, a lot of places have that, but you know, it's kind of strong in this part of the country, I think.
Well, just for some perspective, here in central Minnesota, I live in one of the oldest homes in my community. There's a few that are older, but I live in, you know, the 1 percentile oldest homes, and mine was built in 1914. So
wow.
Yeah. So I give you some sense of perspective. That would be relatively, you know, not old for you guys. So
yeah, a lot of the residential structures here are turn of the century, 1890 to 1920s. You know, at least in the city of Kingston, and many of them significantly older. You know, like wood structure houses. There's a lot in that time range. You know?
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, let me do a little bit of orientation for people, and then Tony, I'll turn it over. Anthony, I'll turn it over to you. Just welcome everybody. My name's Chuck Marohn with Strongtowns. We're going to get started here in just a minute. A couple brief things. There is a chat room. Feel free to chat in there all you want. I am not going to be able to monitor that as we go because I'm going to be doing other things. So talks amongst yourselves basically, and you know, enjoy. I will be able to at the end here, if you click on the Q&A button, there's a different button in there, the Q&A button. You can click on that, and if you put a question in there, we will try to at the end go through as many of those as we can and answer them. I know we have a limited amount of time, but we'll do our best to get to them. So put it there. I won't tell you where the bathrooms are because I don't know. You're gonna have to figure that one out for yourself. And besides that, I'll hand it over to Anthony and we can get started.
Great. Man.
Yeah, go for it. You're on, my friend.
So thank you everybody for joining us tonight, and welcome to a discussion on how to grow our city. We're kind of headlining Chuck Marohn from Strongtowns, and he's going to talk a bunch about kind of the Strongtowns approach to cities and planning. Special thanks to Tanya Garment, who put this together, and her, myself, and a group of other people, including Common Council members, Andrea Schau and Jeffrey Ventura Morel, have kind of been working on this group of people to drum up some support for the land use planning regulation overhaul that the city of Kingston's been doing. Kind of quick recap of what's going on for you, those of you who don't aren't up to date with what's happening. Roughly 2016, the city of Kingston implemented their 2025 comprehensive plan, giant book of plans on what was going to happen in the city going forward. 2019, the mayor put together a group of the zoning task force to put together an RFP and get to look for a consultant that would help the city look at our land use planning, look at zoning, and reevaluate it. Our team just went through all the relevant documents that the city has kind of on these general plans on city growth and community goals, and put together a pretty comprehensive list of things that's available on the City of Kingston's website. You can look at the RFP to kind of guide a consultant on what we want the city to look like going forward and what our basic goals are, so that we can find a consultant that would be able to handle the project of this scope. We sent that out in end of 2019, found a consultant that will do it. 2020, for February 2020, the Common Council went through the Finance Committee, approved the spending on this project, and then COVID happened. And the world basically shut down. So the city was unable to actually spend the money. This project went dormant. So now we're putting together a group of people to try to reignite this discussion. And there's a lot of things happening in our city. There's been a lot of things that have been happening, a lot of new energy, a lot of money being spent, a lot of very large projects happening in our city. And there's a large group of the community that is really interested in making sure that that money, that energy becomes part of our community and is not kind of overwhelming the discussion. And we want to make sure that all of our community members are involved in the process, and good city planning is going to be the goal to that. So that's one of the things that Chuck is going to talk about in much better detail. A little about Chuck. Chuck is you're the CEO of Strongtowns, right? I mean,
yeah, I'm the founder and president, so
okay.
it's all good.
Yeah.
I'm the guy in charge here.
Chuck's the guy in charge. So Chuck's been in land use planning for at least 2 decades. Holds degrees in both civil engineering and a master's in urban planning from the University of Minnesota. If you haven't been to the Strongtowns website, I strongly recommend you do that. There's a lot of great resources on there. The book is also great, and everyone in the Common Council should be reading that. And everyone in municipal government and in general should be looking at that stuff. Really a smart, kind of pragmatic, all-encompassing view on municipal government, land use planning, and it's a really good way to think about the way that our community engages with our government and regulations. With that, I'll turn it over to Chuck.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. And I want to say thank you to you, Anthony, for the invitation. I also want to say thank you to Alderman Ventura Morel, who's here with us as well. And I think the 3 of us at the end, and there might be one more, will be able to answer questions and field that. So thank you to the 2 of you, and also to everyone who's at home or on the radio listening to us too, which is pretty cool. We've have 60 minutes total, and we've spent a little bit of that. So I'm gonna make my portion not totally limited, but a little bit focused, because I want us to walk away with a common understanding of how to assemble places tonight, and leave plenty of time at the end for us to have some dialogue. Just real quick, Strongtowns is about a model of development that allows our cities, towns, and neighborhoods to become financially strong and resilient. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. We were founded back in 2009. I'm coming to you tonight from central Minnesota, which is where I'm from. But we have people that work all over the country. This presentation comes from the book that we put out in 2019 called Strongtowns. And I encourage you, if you have not had a chance, to go look at that. Make no little plans is an idea. It's a concept that in many ways is very American, right? The idea of make no little plans is one of these things that, we would put on our kids' wall. We would put into a meme, a poster when we're having a down day or things don't seem like they're going well. We look at this and we're like, make no little plans, dream big, go out and accomplish big things. It's very American to think big and to act big and to look at, the people who kind of, stir men's blood, so to speak, to quote Daniel Burnham, as being the decisive people who take large, decisive steps to secure the future. This is the kind of thing we, etch into granite and stone and put up and say, this is who we are as a people. This is who we are as a nation. That quote, make no little plans, they have no magic to stir men's blood. It comes from the Chicago Plan, put together by Burnham in the early 1900s after the Chicago fire. And the idea was We were going to set up, this great plan for the redevelopment, the kind of renaissance of Chicago. And if you go to planning school, as I did, you'll be inspired by Burnham, and you'll be inspired by this idea of make no little plans. We are a country who has largely embraced this idea of big, kind of, in a sense, go big or go home. And there's a reason why Burnham wrote this in. I mean, when Burnham sat and thought about a burned down Chicago and how it would be reconstituted, literally one of the great cities of North America, how we could build it to be an even greater city, how we could, to use the adage of today, how we could build back better, right? What he did is he looked at the great cities of the world. He looked around the world and said, Chicago is a great city and can be a great city like this. And he took his inspiration from these great places, make no little plans. I think it's interesting to note that we have adopted this as kind of our national psyche. We have put this into effect as our approach to development. And today, when you look across North America, you look at the way we have built our cities, the way we have built our places, it is very clear that we make no little plans. We do things in a very large, intentional way. We were chatting before we started here, and I'm aware of many of the initiatives that come out of the governor's office there in New York, large initiatives to go in and do a transformative project here and a transformative project there. This is the way we build. We make no little plans. I want to contrast the way we build pre-Great Depression to the way we build today, this idea of make no little plans, because the world that Daniel Burnham inhabited actually approached the process of development very different than we do today. This is a map of the city of Fresno. I use Fresno, California, because we've got great maps of it. But if you look at your community, you look at places of New York, you look around the country, you'll see a similarity between the development pattern of Fresno and the development patterns that we've grown used to everywhere else. This is the boundaries of Fresno in 1897. And what I want to show you is that prior to the end of World War II, Fresno would grow, here it is in 1909, in a pattern that was incremental, a pattern that while maybe they had grand plans for the future, the way they went about assembling their place, the way they went about filling in those plans, now we're at 1934, here's the end of World War II, was incremental in nature. Yes, it might have had a grand vision. Yes, it might have been a big plan. But the implementation of it, the way we put things together, and the way Daniel Burnham would imagine Chicago being put together was not a series of large leaps, a series of big steps. It was a series of many little steps, many small little experiments, many small little things to fill in the details of and create this grander plan. After World War II, we began to build cities in a different way. We took an incremental process, a process of assembling things in an incremental way from the bottom up. And we made it very top down. We made, instead of small steps, we started to grow in very large leaps around a core series of understandings about how to create growth and jobs and economic prosperity in our country. And we can see this manifest in a city like Fresno. Here's the boundaries of Fresno in 1958. Now we go to 1970, and then we go into the 80s, the 90s, and up to 2010. What you see is that we replace this incremental pattern. You can think of the city growing like a culture in a petri dish, incrementally up, incrementally out, and becoming incrementally more intense, to something that was just hyper out, a growth machine in a sense, in one dimension. The idea that now we would grow in these very large leaps with very large plans, make no little plans. This has had a profound effect on our cities. We have been able to create through this development pattern a lot of growth. And as you're experiencing right now with some of the pandemic fallout and shifts in migration patterns, this influx of people and a large amount of growth kind of all at once, this is a pattern that we see repeated over and over again in cities all across North America. This is data from Lafayette, Louisiana. And again, I use this because it's really good representative data of what we see in other cities across the country. At the end of World War II, Lafayette was a little over 33,000 people. Today, it's a little over 120. It's a 3.5 times increase. But when we look at Lafayette, Louisiana, we say, okay, how do people get clean drinking water? Well, at the end of World War II, it took 5 feet of pipe per person. Today, with that hyper horizontal pattern, it now takes 50 feet of pipe per person. That's a 10x increase. How about fire protection? How about keeping people safe from the kind of fires that destroyed Chicago in the early 1900s? At the end of World War II, it took 2.4 hydrants per 1,000 people to protect the city of Lafayette. Today, it takes 21 times that amount. When we look at this pattern of development, what we recognize is that, yes, we've made no little plans. Yes, we are working with very large leaps. We consume lots of property all at once and build things in a way that past civilizations never did. But what we see is that while our population grows, our liabilities grow even more. While we can add people very easily and while we can accommodate them and bring them in and experience that as new growth, what we do in the process is we take on larger and larger amounts of liabilities. Our population grows 3.5 times, but our liabilities grow 10 times and 20 times. This would be okay, and we can maybe justify this to ourselves, like this would make some sense if we were richer, if we were more prosperous, if we were enjoying a certain level of security and affluence that wasn't available to our ancestors. But when we step back and we look at a city like Lafayette, and certainly a city like Kingston and really all the cities that I've experienced in upstate New York, we see a similar trend to this. While our population goes up and our liabilities go up even more, our incomes actually don't. Our wealth actually doesn't. When we look at families of the post-World War II era and we adjust their earnings for today, what we see is that the earnings are barely up at all. Our families are today have more debt, have less savings rate, and are in a financially more tenuous position than they have been at any point since the post-World War II era. This development pattern is generating a lot of growth. Yes, it's part of a big plan to create growth in our economy, but is it making us wealthier? Really, it is not. I want to demonstrate how this kind of thing happens because it's very elusive to us, and we're often very kind of attuned to the growth part of it without being attuned to the liability part of it. These are two identical blocks in my hometown. If you look at them, you'll see they're the same size area. They have the same amount of public infrastructure. If you think of this from a city budget standpoint, they cost the same to provide ongoing service and maintenance to. But these two blocks are different. Their development pattern on them is different. That one on the left was built in the 1920s. Actually, all three of these were built in the 1920s, all three of these blocks. But the one on the left still has the 1920s building. As my city was growing incrementally, that pre-depression, make no little plans, but take small little steps. What you were seeing is that the brand new development on the outskirts of town, a small little bet. And if things had continued here as they had in cities around the world for thousands of years, you would have seen these buildings, become more intense, more innate. They would have gotten second and third stories. That incremental pattern would have continued, but that's not what happened. We had these built in the 1920s, and we had the Great Depression, then we had World War II, and then we had this new development pattern, this new way of building, hyper out. And so we built out on the edge. These three blocks just stagnated, and they've stagnated for almost a century now. The city was able to label these blocks blight. The one on the right, they got torn down. And now we have a new Taco John's. Taco John's is a drive-through restaurant. I'm fairly certain you don't have Taco John's in upstate New York. You can think of this as like Norwegian Mexican food. My family is mostly Norwegian. This is the kind of spicy food we have. So, a little bit of ketchup, maybe some mild cheddar cheese kind of thing. Everybody in city loved this project, right? We got rid of a block of blight. We got a new building. It meets all the building code requirements. It meets all the parking requirements. It meets the sign ordinance. It meets the setbacks. There's a little bit of green space there. They put in a sidewalk. It met all the checklist items we said we wanted to see in our community. The problem, and nobody bothered to think about this ahead of time or really analyze it, that old and blighted block, very similar to the one that was torn down, has a value of $1.1 million. You add up all those little tiny properties and that's what their worth is. If you go 2 blocks over then, the same size area, the same amount of public infrastructure, the same ongoing cost to the community to provide service and maintenance, that block has a value of only $618,000. The city's actually collecting 78% more taxes on that old, blighted, rundown block than that shiny and new one. This is not an anomaly. This is part of a broader trend that we recognize in cities all over the United States. It's fun to be able to share this with you because I show this one to places everywhere when I talk because I like Buffalo. This is Buffalo. I really like Buffalo. And not just because they've lost as many Super Bowls as we have here in Minnesota. I don't know if that's a sore spot for all of you. I don't know if you are more lean Buffalo fans or Giants fans. I'll assume you're Buffalo fans like I would be. I really like Buffalo. I've been here many times. I like the people. I like the place. I feel sad because Buffalo has lost population every single year since the end of World War II. There's been a lot of decline, a lot of disinvestment. The city has struggled in many ways, and I know you're attuned to this even more than I am. When we look at Buffalo, though, and we ask a question about where is the wealth of Buffalo, where's the financial productivity of this place? What I'm going to show you right now in the third dimension, so in the vertical dimension, is something called financial productivity. It's if you think of a farmer going out and spreading seed across a field, the parts of the field that grow up the most robustly, that's where we say we have the most productive parts of the farm field. That's where we get the most bushels per acre. For instance, where in Buffalo do we get the most value per acre? Where's the most productive land use? And I'm going to show you. It's the core downtown. It's a core downtown and those immediate neighborhoods around it. That part of the city that was created, yes, maybe with some grand plans, but was built incrementally, piece by piece, in that incremental little pattern that we saw in that old and blighted block in the last slide. Those are the places that not only have tremendous financial productivity, but have held their wealth and retained their value over generations, despite decline, despite neglect, despite investments that have gone other places. And it's really not even close. These traditional core neighborhoods vastly outperform all the stuff that's been built post-World War II, all the stuff that's been built in this, build it and they will come, make no little plans kind of mindset. This is a trend we see in cities all over North America. We see this throughout the Northeast. We see this throughout the Southwest. We see it in coastal areas. We see it in inland areas. We see it in the cold northern climates. We see it in the warm southern climates. It's in big cities, small cities, mid-sized cities, wherever we have these places that were assembled incrementally in that pre-Great Depression pattern, that pattern where we might lay out a neighborhood and say, this is our vision, but all the steps to fill that in were not done in large leaps. They were not done in large investments. They were not done, in big ways. They were really filled in incrementally over time in a very complex, adaptive way. When we look at communities like this, what we see is that that's where the wealth is. That's where the productivity is. That's where the city is getting their core financial strength from. This is, and I gave you the data on Lafayette earlier. This is Lafayette, Louisiana again. And I go back to this one because we have great maps, because we have great data, but also because it is so representative of everything I've shown you. This map looks like the other maps that I just produced. That area of blue in the middle is the core downtown. That little part of blue on the edge there, there's a crescent of blue. Those are some of the core neighborhoods. Where you see blue, what you are seeing on this map are properties that pay more in taxes and fees to the city than they require in ongoing service and maintenance. This is, in a sense, the profitable properties from the community's perspective. Everywhere where you see red on this map, those are properties that the city, the community, the taxpayers are losing money on. These are properties that cost more to provide service and maintenance than they create in tax revenue on an annual basis. The higher the line goes, the more that disparity is. That blue area in the middle and that little crescent of blue there to the what would be the east, to the right as you're looking at it. Here's some snapshots of those places. The top image here is the core downtown of Lafayette, Louisiana. It, from an eye test, does not look prosperous. And certainly, you know, I've been there. It struggles in many ways. There's a lot of things that they are doing right now to make it better, and it could be very much better. That area on the bottom there, one of the poorest neighborhoods in the community, again, you know, from an eye test, does not look prosperous. Looks like it's struggling. It is struggling. There's a lot of poor people that live in this neighborhood. But despite the outward appearance of neglect, of decline, of struggle, these neighborhoods are disproportionately paying the freight for the community. These neighborhoods here are financially very profitable. They actually require less in service and maintenance than they pay annually in taxes. The city is making, the community, the taxpayers are making money off of these properties. And let me just be clear, the analysis that we did here in Lafayette assumes that the city goes out and maintains this road, maintains these ditches, keeps the street lights working, keeps the, you know, everything going. The fact that they're not, the fact that you can see that they're neglecting these places, you know, just makes that profit margin even bigger. These development patterns from a financial standpoint are what is making the city strong. All that stuff in red. That is the post-World War II stuff. And as you get out further, the insolvency of it grows more and more. This is the gas stations, the strip malls, the franchise drive-through restaurants, the big box stores, the windy cul-de-sac developments with the, you know, the homes with the big garages. These places look new and they look flashy, and much like the Taco John's, it feels like progress. It's a big redevelopment all at once, or it's a big new developments or a big thing that we're doing all at once. But financially, these things are a net drag on the community. If we look at the numbers in Lafayette, Louisiana, the median household pays $1,500 a year in taxes to the city in order for the city to maintain everything that they built, in order for them to fix the roads, fix the pipes, provide police and fire protection, do all the services that they promised. Median taxes would need to go from $1,500 a year to $9,200 a year. 1 out of every $5 that a family in Lafayette makes would need to go back to the city just to maintain what they've already built, just to take care of the stuff they already have in the ground. That's not going to happen. It can't physically, can't possibly happen. And so Lafayette is already facing what many, many cities across this country are facing, which is a decision on what road do we fix? What road do we put off and let fall apart? What pipe do we repair? What pipe do we let go? What neighborhood do we keep? What neighborhood do we walk away from? If this sounds a little bit like a city that you know, there's a reason for that. When we look at the North American development pattern, when I look at your city and I look at your neighborhoods and I look at what's gone on in your core and what's gone on the outskirts, what I see is a development pattern that was pioneered over 100 years ago in the city of Detroit. As the city of Detroit was on its way to becoming the Motor City, they were the first city to begin to experiment with what has become the North American development pattern. They were the first city to, run a highway through the middle of the city. The first city to really create a commuter culture where people would live out on the edge and then drive in for work and then drive back home at the end of the day. They were the first city to, at large, tear down buildings to create parking lots to accommodate this development pattern. And when the country hit the Great Depression, and cities started to go into default, started to experience bankruptcy, started to really struggle, the city of Detroit and some cities around it that were kind of tied into that economy did fairly well. In comparison, they did really well. And so by the end of World War II, what was very clear to every mayor, every city council member, every Rotarian, every bank president, everybody who was involved in influencing the pattern of development at the local level, is that what our cities needed to do, any city that wanted to be successful, needed to embrace this new style, this build it and they will come, this very big approach, and copy the development pattern pioneered by one of our most successful cities, that being Detroit. That's what we all did. That's what our cities all did. That's what your city did. That's what my city did. Detroit's not some kind of crazy anomaly. It's not some place that, has done something strange or different. The people there are not any different than you or me. Detroit's just early. They're just a couple decades ahead of everybody else in this development pattern. The thing they did that is so profound, and this is really what I want to kind of hone in on and pass along to you, is they switched from a development pattern that was complex to one that was merely complicated. Let's take a moment to look at the difference here. When we think of complex systems, we're thinking of things like a rainforest. We understand that a rainforest is made up of many different flora and fauna. They all act independently of each other. They all are able to adapt and change their approach to respond to stress, to respond to opportunity. When we look at a rainforest, it appears to have an order, but we understand that that order is emergent. It's not imposed. It's one that emerges from all these complex interactions. When we look at cities, particularly cities prior to the Great Depression, cities such as yours in its very early days, what we see is, again, this complex adaptive pattern. We see cities of this time period being a bunch of individual actors being able to act incrementally, independently within a framework, all reacting to opportunities and stresses in the environment to create what really is ultimately human habitat, a pattern that emerges from this complex interactions. These are complex systems, and complex systems are very different from systems that are just complicated. A Rube Goldberg machine is complicated. And when we look at it, we're a little bit astounded. We're a little bit marveled by how complicated it is. There's all kinds of things going on here. But if you cut one of these strings or move one of these blocks, the machine doesn't evolve and change. It just breaks. It just stops working. If you think of a wash machine, if your wash machine gets stressed too much, if you push it beyond its capacities, it doesn't evolve and change and become a toaster. It just breaks. It just stops being a washing machine. This is the difference between systems that are complex and systems that are complicated, systems that are built incrementally over time and systems that are imposed all at once. What we see in a rainforest is that if you get a little bit too much rain or a little bit too much sun in any cycle, yes, the thing will change, it will adapt, and it will evolve. New patterns will emerge, but it doesn't fail. It doesn't collapse. It just becomes a different version of a rainforest. Do that same thing in a cornfield, give it too much rain or too much sun in any particular season. It doesn't evolve and adapt and become soybeans. It doesn't change and become potatoes. It just stops being corn. It just fails at what it was designed to do. We see the same thing with human habitat, with cities. When we have cities that are created incrementally, when they're built in that, adaptive framework, even when there is a vision, even when there is a plan, when the details are filled in the way Daniel Burnham would have experienced it, what you see is that you're able to take advantage of opportunities, respond to stresses in ways that are novel. When we go out and we build things all at once to a finished state, when we go out and we oppose an order and we do it in a large leap, what we wind up with is something that lacks that adaptability, lacks that flexibility. It loses the strength that comes from that complex development pattern. This is the way cities have been built for thousands of years. This is my hometown. I'm actually from Brainerd, Minnesota, which is a couple hours north of Minneapolis, St. Paul. This is what my hometown looked like in 1870. You'll notice it looks like that pop-up shack that I showed you earlier with the Taco John's. This would have been the center of town back in 1870. And due to that kind of complex nature, there was a plan here. There was a grand plan for how the city would lay out. There were places for parks and municipal buildings. But the very first iteration of this was just some pop-up shacks. We didn't go out and build the Colosseum and hope we'd get Rome. We didn't go build, some big thing and hope it would fill in. We went out and we started with what we had, and we started to build, just like your city did, just like every other city prior to the Great Depression did in all of human history. And this place was successful. More and more people moved here. When more and more people moved here and started to create their own little pop-up shacks around, pretty soon the place became more valuable. The land actually increased in value. And you got this natural redevelopment pressure where these incremental buildings would shift. After 30 years of that pattern of incrementally growing up and out and incrementally becoming more intense, this little block here would become this block here. It's the exact same street in roughly the same place. After another 40 years of incrementally growing up, incrementally growing out, and incrementally becoming more intense, these 2- and 3-story wood structures would become buildings of brick and granite. This is the way that cities have historically grown strong. This is how cities have historically grown wealthy. It's not a big build it all at once. It's not a big program from the top down to create something and hope things fill in. It's actually focusing on that filling in, that incremental part, that squeezing every little bit of value we can out of the stuff we have already built. Incidentally, this is what the same street looks like today. And if you look at this street, it looks in a way like a lot of the streets that I vision now in your city, in Kingston. I've went through and looked, and I saw a lot of this very similar development pattern. Buildings that used to be there that are now parking lots, buildings that used to be full and occupied that are now struggling, houses that seem like they should be more that are struggling, and neighborhoods that are having difficulty. Despite the infusion of cash, despite the infusion of demand that you're seeing now, there's a lot of untapped capacity here. When we look at this street, and I think this is an important takeaway, there's $500,000 of public wealth invested in that street, invested in the asphalt and the concrete sidewalks and the streetlights and the drainage system and the water system and the fire hydrants and the storms and the sanitary sewer and the manholes, all this stuff. There's $500,000 in that little stretch of street. That's 2 blocks right there. Where is the wealth that the community will tap into to sustain that street, to take care of those things, to fix and replace, to repair? That wealth used to be there. It's now gone. Right? It's now been wiped out. So where is it? It's not there. This is where you get in Lafayette the $9,500 bill for households that are only paying $1,500. I'm going to close with this, because when we talk about an incremental development pattern, we talk about filling places in incrementally, helping them start with very little. And instead of trying to make a large leap, instead of trying to have a big project, focusing on what the next step is. The pushback that I often get is, well, Chuck, we want to do big things. We want to do grand things. We have a grand vision for the future. We don't want to sit around and discipline ourselves to work incrementally. We don't want to have to take that next step. We know what we want. We know how to get there. We're just going to go out and do it. What's wrong with that? And if we stick to the incremental approach that Strongtowns pushes forward, we really can't accomplish the things we want to accomplish. Here's a nice little street. I don't know if you recognize this one or not. This is what it looked like in 1878. Here it is in 1898, 20 years later. You'll see it's a little bit more intense than that last one. If you keep looking, I don't know if you recognize it here, but you may recognize it here. This is what it looked like in 1911. And this little street here, which is was becoming a grand place even back then, you probably recognize today as this. Every great place that we've ever built prior to the Great Depression, and it's a long list of amazing places, were all built as the culmination of many incremental steps. They were all the culmination of many small things that added up to something really fantastic. And so this idea of make no little plans is one that I embrace. Like at Strongtowns, we agree, like make no little plans. Go ahead and have a grand vision for the future. Have a grand plan for what you want to accomplish. But along with make no little plans, take no large leaps. We really need to discipline ourselves to work in increments that are scaled to our community, that take those steps that allow things to be filled in, to make really good productive use of what we've built, to create that strength and resiliency as we grow. When we look at all of these places, as I said before, we didn't build the Colosseum so that we could get Rome. The Colosseum is the culmination of centuries of incremental development that made Rome the place it was. The same with the Eiffel Tower. Paris did not go out and say, we want to be a great city, let's build the Eiffel Tower. If you've ever been to Paris, what you'll see is neighborhood after neighborhood after neighborhood of amazing, amazing place that culminates in the Eiffel Tower and the surrounding areas and the beauty that is there. Same with all these other cities. What we recognize is that the greatness comes from that discipline, that step-by-step process. And as you're facing the struggles and the challenges today that you have, whether it's this influx of people, whether it's talking about things like form-based codes and how do we create the city that we want, how do we handle this flow, the urgency that you should experience is not how do we get enough growth. It should be not how do we, do the next thing, or how do we tap into the next program from Albany or the next program from Washington, D.C. It should be how do we accommodate this in a fashion where we get the feedback and the strength and the resiliency so that when we're done, we're really proud of what we have. We really value this, that it is resilient, that it is adaptable, that it is strong, and that the community is wealthier and better off by the time it's done. Strongtowns.org is our organization. We started as a blog. We still publish 2 or 3 articles a day, every weekday. We have 3 different podcast streams. We've got a YouTube channel. We're active on all the major social media platforms. If you're interested in this message, we are sharing tidbits of it every single day. There's a whole lot here, and I welcome you to go to strongtowns.org and be part of our conversation. With that, we are going to stop. And we got, I didn't do too bad there. We still got 20 minutes left. We're going to head over to the Q&A and work on answering some of those questions. I will make sure that you guys are unmuted, or you can do that.
Chuck, if you want to take a look at the questions for a second, I can maybe take a minute to relate what you just said to our city.
That's great. Go for it.
So, I'm sure a lot of people look at this are seeing like these large cities that Chuck's talking about and saying that maybe that doesn't relate so much to our small city of 23,000 or so. But you can see in the plans that like the current zoning that we have in the city of Kingston really does, it's incentivizing the idea of ripping down these old buildings and putting in things like the Eckards on Broadway and the Big Bubble laundromat, these parking lots, things that are parking centric, things that are not focused on like mixed use density that the city was originally built on. So the city has tried to adapt to that a little bit over time. In the 1960s, when urban renewal happened, that's when the zoning that the city is currently operating on was put in. Our zoning code has become very, very complex because of all these little piecemeal things to try to fix those problems. I'm sure a lot of you are following. There's like technically urban livestock and urban farming is not legal in the city of Kingston, and the county council is trying to fix that right now. But there's all these little pieces, and what we're looking to do is eliminate the 1960 zoning code as it is and build it from new, looking to make our city look the way it did when it was in its highlight around the turn of the century, where there's a lot of density, there's a lot of mixed use, there's multifamily properties allowed almost anywhere where people can live and work in places that they can walk to and interact with their community really, really well, and not the types of this urban renewal view that we've had, for the last 60 years odd now.
Yeah, and if I can jump in here, build on what Anthony had said. The reason why I became interested in zoning was because probably since I first began on the council, was because I kept seeing that a lot of the legislation we were dealing with was trying to work around a zoning code that was essentially outdated, obsolete, and in many ways redundant. And I realized that we kept doing these little fixes to work around it, which was basically dealing with the symptom, but not addressing the big picture problem, which was that we need a new zoning code. And so that's when I became, when I heard that the mayor was forming this zoning task force, I asked to be part of it. And successfully wrote, the task force successfully wrote an RFP, a request for proposals, and chose a very good proposal that I'm hoping the next step will be for it to come to the finance committee for them to look into how the city will pay for it. And hopefully we can get a new zoning code that looks at the city we want to be in the future and the city we are today, not the city we were 60 years ago.
That's fantastic. And just knowing, the process that you all have gone through to put that together, I agree. I think you've landed on a very good process and a very good outcome. And I hope you can find a way to continue, because I do think that while not the only shift, it's an important shift, because, especially codes, and I'm not familiar with your code specifically, but codes in your part of the world tend to be very overly bureaucratic, overly complex, complicated, very not user friendly. So let me answer this first question, because I think this gets to this. There's one from Joe Zatka, and I'm sorry if I'm saying your name wrong, but it's a Eastern European sounding name that my tongue doesn't do as well as it maybe should. How do you understand the scale of no little plans to no large leaps? How should developments or single developments scale in an existing neighborhood? And then he puts an example in, is a 150 unit complex too large for a small block? I think the important way to think about this, and this is really what the advantage of a form-based code is that every neighborhood should be allowed to shift and grow and adapt to evolve to that next level of intensity. But when you skip and you go multiple layers up, that's when you get that distortion of the underlying property values. That's when you get a lot of displacement. That's when you get a lot of neighborhood anxiety over change. So what you want to do is you want to look and say, okay, if I have a neighborhood of single family homes, the idea of this neighborhood of single family homes evolving to be neighborhoods of duplexes, there should be very little regulatory friction to that happening. Like if someone in a neighborhood of single family homes wants to convert their place to a duplex, the process for doing that should be very simple, very straightforward, almost where you show up at City Hall at 9 a.m. with a completed permit application and you walk out at noon with a permit, like that easy. If you want to take in a neighborhood of single family homes and say 150 unit apartment complex, well, now that is a large leap. That's out of proportion. That's out of dimension with the neighborhood. And if I wrote your form-based code, I would exclude that from being a possibility. If it were a possibility, that would have to have a much longer review process and a much longer process to make sure it was compatible and it did work with the neighborhood. What we want to do is we want to make that next step as easy as possible and as frictionless as possible. Because if you're taking small steps, all of the regulation we put in place to make sure it's compatible with the historic district, it's compatible with the parking requirements, it's compatible, those things go away because you're dealing with such small steps. When you're dealing with these large leaps, you wind up with all the bureaucracy, all the red tape, and really outcomes that you're generally not happy with. Either of you two want to comment on that, or you want me to keep going?
I mean, that is the big project that everyone is interested in. It is in our historic district. It is in a mostly commercial area and mixed use right now, and it is by far the largest structure in the area that's being proposed. So, yeah.
Let me look at this next one. James Dowse. And again, apologies if I don't get the name quite right there. Is there data that supports how diverse smaller shops using the same footprint as Taco John's create much greater local take-home pay for local employees than Taco John's? The answer is yes, we actually did that, because one of the big things that for Taco John's, the city was interested in was if we can tear down this block, we can get all these new jobs. And what we found is that the old and blighted block neighborhood had more jobs net, but even more importantly, more full-time jobs, and even more importantly, more locally owned businesses. So businesses where the equity of that building, the equity of the business actually was retained locally. That's really important, because if you look at Taco John's, they do marketing and advertising out of their headquarters in Wyoming. They have a bank out of their headquarters in Wyoming. They have attorneys, they're corporate attorneys. If you look at those small businesses, we went and asked them, do you have an attorney? Yeah, I've got a local attorney I use. Do you have a bank? Yeah, I bank at this local bank. Do you use local advertising? Yeah, I advertise in the newspaper or what have you. And so all of a sudden, what we were able to show is that those smaller businesses, those businesses scaled for the community, not only we're generating more local wealth, but we're actually passing money around the community in a way that magnified itself many times. This is not, and I've seen this in your part of the world a number of times, where it becomes an anti-corporate or anti-chain kind of thing. I think you can go there, but you don't need to. What it really is a scale thing. If we had not torn down a block for Taco John's, we would have 9-10 more businesses there. If we, instead of putting our efforts into how quickly can we move cars through the city, put our efforts into how easy can we make it for people in the neighborhood to actually frequent those businesses, we would be spending a lot less, and we would be getting a lot more, and we would be creating a local economic ecosystem that really benefited everybody. It magnified our dollars a lot more. That's the kind of discipline of working in that incremental way. Again, either of you two want to weigh in on that in any way? Lauren Mathis asks, can you comment on how equity class influences the make no big leaps rule? How do we overcome the powerful influences that won't subscribe to this? There's a number of questions here about equity and justice, and how there's another one here, and I'm going to maybe scroll up a little bit, because there was a question where they went on and had very similar questions. This is Amanda Cassidy. I recognize financial productivity is important, but can you talk about how factors like racial equity, access to affordable housing, food, healthcare, education, employment are being considered in Kingston's plan for growth? I can't speak specifically about Kingston, but I do want to talk about an incremental approach versus a kind of big leap approach. What we see in complex adaptive systems is that all of these things are very important to a community. Affordable housing is important, food is important, healthcare is important, education. When we look at communities of the past, they never did any of these things perfectly. I think it's important to understand that we will never do them perfectly. But what the bottom-up approach did, what the incremental approach did, is it allowed, because you were taking small steps, the people there to, in a sense, adjust and harmonize many different things at once. I'll give you a couple examples from my book. We often talk about local policing. It would be really great if we had cops on the beat. It'd be really great if we had people out walking instead of, distant from us driving through in vehicles. It would be nice if police budgets weren't 40% or 50% of our local budget. It'd be nice if we had that flexibility. If we look at policing today, a lot of policing is response to you know, some of the breakdown of neighborhood design practices. If you go to historic neighborhoods, and we can look in many of yours have these characteristics, homes used to be designed in a fashion, in a manner that provided like a certain level of like neighborhood cohesiveness, neighborhood, you know, what Jane Jacobs called eyes on the street. The idea that I watch your house across the street, you watch mine, we're kind of looking out for each other. If something seems a little bit off, we go, you know, investigate and figure out. You got the nosy neighbor syndrome. I saw this one funny meme once where it was security in the UK and it had these cameras all over. And then it was security in Germany and it had these cameras all over. And then it was security in Italy and it had this old lady sticking out the window doing her laundry. That's what security used to look like. And we've kind of made up for that now with spending an enormous amount on police. We see the same thing with schools. Schools used to be much, you know, different in terms of their placement, their location. Now, we focus on building a school as a complex, and then we wind up spending a lot of money in busing, a lot of money in utilities, a lot of money in relocating people to be able to access, a lot of money after the fact in making places more walkable. What happens when you build incrementally is that you're kind of forced to, with each step, harmonize all these different things. I'm not saying it works out perfect. I'm not saying it will always be perfect, but the greatest layers of injustice that we see are when we take the large leap. We're going to put the highway here, regardless of you know how it affects people. We're going to put the big school here, and these people are just going to have to deal with it. We're going to put the big store here, and sorry, but we need the growth, and so you're just going to have to deal with it. By us harmonizing all these different things in incremental steps, it allows us a framework where we can actually address these issues in a more personal level, in a more humane, in a more, you know, locally compassionate level. I also want to just add one thing. We focus on finance a lot. Finance is, in a sense, for us at the local level, the filter that things have to pass through. So we want to do affordable housing. Great. But we still have to balance our budget. We want to do local food. That's awesome. We still have to balance our budget. What we find is that when we focus on the budget, as opposed to those other things as the filter, all those other things tend to become easier. That seems counterintuitive. If we just focused on affordable housing would become easier. But I'm telling you, every compromise we make on affordable housing is because we're chasing growth, because we're insolvent. Every compromise we make on you know, education or employment is because we're chasing growth, because we're insolvent. The financially stronger we are as a community, the more we insist on that and have that be the filter we work through, the more options and opportunities it gives us to actually deal with the things that matter. Let me scroll up because I clicked another one here. What is the line between incremental and too big? I don't want to end with that one, so let me try to answer that one very quick. I don't think that there is a line, in the sense that, you know, there's a kind of a universal truth. This is, I think, what a good planning process will do. And when you create a form-based code, this is what it will result in. I feel like the takeaway here that I want you to walk away with is that stasis cannot be an option for you. If your goal is, and in so many communities, this is the approach, 95% of our neighborhoods will never change. They'll be locked in stasis and they're not going to evolve and adapt at all. But 5% of them is where we're going to stick all the growth. And those places will be utterly transformed and utterly changed. And in a decade, they won't be recognizable. And then we'll debate over what's the next neighborhood that's going to get, you know, gentrified or completely bombed out or completely changed overnight. That's a really bad approach. It screws up your local economics. It screws up your local culture. It really sidelines local small developers, local entrepreneurs. It crowds out local investment, and it means your community will be dominated by only outside big players. By having an incremental approach, what you're saying is that every neighborhood is going to evolve a little bit. Every neighborhood is going to have to change. And the question that you have, or the thing that you're going to struggle with, is not whether the neighbor should change or not. Yes, it will change. The question is, what is that next increment? And that's what a good planning process will do. That's what a good form-based code will do. It will lay that out, and it will have, in a sense, the next evolution for each neighborhood laid out in code, so that you can accomplish that. I can't set that for you. You have to set that for yourself. And that's kind of the community dialogue that needs to happen. Can we do one more? I know we're up against the time, and I don't want to screw up the radio broadcast and everybody else's night, and I want to respect everyone's time, but are you good with one more, Anthony?
Yeah. I just need like maybe one or 2 minutes to wrap up when you're done.
All right. William, I'm sorry about these last names. Pugliese. It looks like a great last name. I wish I could pronounce it correctly. It says, it sounds like you're advocating for increased infill development and urban density as an alternative to sprawl. This type of development is often intensely opposed by local activists. How do you reconcile the kind of development you favor with the opposition and intensity, the intensely local planning processes in the United States? I picked this one because I want to push back on two terms. The first one is the infill development, and the second one is density. These are like planner terms, and I'm a planner. You'll listen to my presentation. I never said either of those words. If you read Strongtowns, you'll find we never advocate for either of those things. I think that a lot of damage has been done in this country in the name of density and the name of infill. What we need to do, and let me say, I think the rational opposition to both of those things by activists, as the question said, is very sound, because we've done a lot of destruction. We've torn down a lot of good communities. We've imposed a lot of really weird stuff on places in the name of infill and in the name of density. What we need to do is look at our cities as living, breathing, changing organisms, as human habitat, as complex adaptive systems. And we need to ask, not how do we keep it locked in stasis, but what does the next generation of this place look like? As an analogy, when I look at your city, what I see is a child that is immature, in a sense, emaciated. It has all the bones and the structure of a child, but it doesn't have the meat. It doesn't have the maturity. It still needs to grow up. That was why I showed you the pop-up shack, and then the next iteration and the next iteration. Those were a child growing into, a young adult growing into a mature person. That's why I showed you Times Square and the iterations it went through. What you need to do is we need to look at, the city as it's built today and say, this is in a very early stage of its development. It's in an adolescent stage. How do we mature it to adulthood? How do we get it to the next level of maturity? And that is a conversation not about how do we impose density, or not how do we come in with a big infill project that's going to be subsidized, or, this and that. It really is asking a question of how does our neighborhood naturally evolve to its next step? And that's going to involve a new code. It's going to involve changes to your plan, but it's also going to involve a community recognizing that stasis is equal to, in natural systems, a slow death and a slow decline. We don't have to embrace a flood, a huge leap to the next thing, but we do need to embrace an incremental change in our pattern over time, so that our places can adapt to the next generation, to the next round of what your city needs. Are you guys getting the cold now? Did you get the snow last week?
Yeah. So winter finally got here last week.
All right. We have, I don't know what the temperature is at this moment, but when I walked to work today, it was 20 below. I'm guessing you're not that cold. It says 5 below right now. So I'm gonna head home. It's been wonderful chatting with all of you. I appreciate you taking the time. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all the questions, but thank you. And Anthony and Jeffrey, I appreciate you two being here with me.
Yeah, thank you, Chuck, very much. The goal of this conversation was or this event was to start the conversation in the city, and to really start getting people to think about planning again. And I think that there's a lot of fantastic information that was just shared and ways to rethink about how our city is going to grow. The big goal is to contact your common council member. If you're in Ward 1, you can talk to Jeffrey, although I'm pretty sure we already have his vote. But contact your common council member, let them know that you're interested in zoning and land use planning redesign, and you want to see this back on the schedule, and you want to see a vote for the funds being appropriated to make it happen. There will be more conversations in the community, and we hope to have more of them. Hopefully the radio station is going to help us put that together, and some community organizing, which will also be part of the plan once we actually appropriate funds to spend money. There'll be a lot of community outreach. There's going to be a lot of community input in this process. It's going to take a long time to do, but if we don't start it now, then we're going to have another big project happen and we won't have any say. So thank you everyone for coming. Jeffrey, do you want to add anything?
No, I just want to say that a lot of people think when they think of zoning and planning that this is something that only pertains to wealthy developers. And I want to say, if you're somebody who cares about gentrification, who cares about housing equality, planning should be and zoning should be on your radar. For example, recently we found out that the emergency housing and accessory units that have been used successfully to prevent displacement in other communities are not allowed by our code. And that's just one example of where planning can make a huge difference.
That's a great example. That's a great example. I feel like what you are getting at is something we talk about here at Strongtowns a lot, which is a city built by many hands. And you have a beautiful framework there. You've gorgeous interaction with the river. You've got a great, grid design in your neighborhoods. You have a lot of potential for greatness. And I think that idea of building a city with many hands, as opposed to a few people, is something that, is a great vision for people to think about as you start this process. So thanks for letting me be part of it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck.
Take care, everybody.
You as well.